This week we discuss the four main kinds of moral values upon which we draw to make ethical decisions in our lives and in the workplace. These values are rights, justice, utilitarianism, and Aristotelianism, which is addressed in your book under the title of Ethic of Care and Virtue Theory. The first thing we'll do is take a look at the concept of moral rights, then move on to discuss Kant's deontology, which is usually taken as being the ethical foundation of the concept of rights. Then we'll discuss negative rights and positive rights. A moral right is something that a person is owed purely because of her intrinsic status, not because of anything she has done to earn it. Now, what is that intrinsic status, that thing that gives someone rights? Some might argue that it's humanity. Just being a human being makes us the kind of being that is the bearer of rights. Others would extend rights to any sentient being. That would be any being that has experiences and consciousness. Others would say that it's being made in the image of God that gives us rights. It is only those who are made in God's image who have the dignity that is requisite for being a bearer of rights. What about just being alive? When we discuss environmental ethics in a few weeks, we'll find out that there is a group of people who would argue that any living thing has the same rights as any other living thing. That would put human beings on the same level with plants and all other kinds of alive creatures. Finally, one might think that the intrinsic status that gives us the ability to bear rights is our rational autonomy. This is the answer that we're going to look at in more depth because it has been the most influential on current thinking about moral rights. For Kant, the foundation of ethics is rational autonomy. Rational autonomy is that element of humanity that gives us our intrinsic value. It's what makes us more than just objects in the world. Rational autonomy is our ability to reflect objectively and abstractly, and then on the basis of this reflection, direct our lives with free choices. According to Kant, the one thing that is good without qualification is a good will. A good will is a rational, autonomous being who freely chooses that which is good and chooses it for its own sake, not for the sake of anything else, especially not for the sake of any kind of benefit to herself or even to other people. Sometimes Kant describes the moral community as a kingdom of ends, and he famously says this, that in the kingdom of ends, everything has either a price or a dignity. What has a price can be replaced by something else as its equivalent. What, on the other hand, is raised above all price, and therefore admits of no equivalent, has a dignity. So Kant separates everything in the world into two categories, objects and persons. Objects can be used merely as a means. Persons have intrinsic dignity, and they cannot be used merely as a means to some goal or end, no matter how important that goal or end might be. In a little while, we'll discuss utilitarianism, and we'll see that Kant's idea of the absolute dignity of the human being is something that conflicts with utilitarianism's approach to ethics. All of the rules are derived from one ultimate principle that he calls the categorical imperative. He gives us a number of different versions of the categorical imperative, and from these various versions we can extract three tests of ethical action. The first test is this: does my action treat all rational, autonomous beings as an end and not merely as a means? This rule is grounded in the concept of objectivity. We naturally treat ourselves as an end. To treat ourselves as an end means that we see ourselves as a being with ultimate significance, and we take our needs, wants, and desires and fears very seriously. So every day I wake up in the morning and I naturally treat myself as an end. If I'm hungry, I eat. If I'm thirsty, I drink. If I want to improve my life, I go to college. Right? So I'm treating myself as an end at all times. Kant argues that if I'm going to be objective, and I realize that all humans have intrinsic worth, then I should treat everyone else as an end also. Note that this rule says that we should not treat rational autonomous beings merely as a means. What this implies is that we can treat one another as means, and in fact we have to. If we're going to live in society, we are going to gain benefits from one another. That's just what it means to use someone as a means. The key for Kant is that while we gain benefits from one another, we fully recognize each other's humanity, that we treat one another as an end at the same time that we use one another as a means. The second test of ethical action is whether my action is universalizable. For an action to be universalizable means that I can, at the same time that I am acting, will that this action would be a universal law of human nature. In other words, I can rationally will that every other human being who's in the same circumstances will do the exact same thing that I'm doing. This again is rooted in the idea of objectivity, that I shouldn't make any special exceptions for myself. The third test is reversibility. The concept of an action being reversible does not mean that the action could be undone. What it means is that we can reverse roles with everyone in the situation and still rationally will the action to be done. If we're objective and we see the decision from everyone's perspective, we should have just as much confidence that the action is the correct one. So every time I'm thinking of taking an action, I can test that action against these three tests. And every time I am reflecting on one of my general principles in life, I can test those principles against these three tests as well. Negative rights are the rights we have not to be interfered with as we practice our rational autonomy. These rights include the freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, association, religion, assembly, and privacy. And this means that I'm free from things like coercion, false imprisonment, unlawful confiscation, cruel and unusual punishment, and so forth. So my negative rights, again, are the rights that I have not to be interfered with as I practice my rational autonomy, as I think through things and freely act upon my convictions. Positive rights are the rights to the resources I'll need as I do this. So if I'm going to exercise my negative rights in a way that comports with human dignity, there are certain things that are going to be required in order for me to have the power to do this. Positive rights then include the right to work, the right to property, the right to an education, to health care, to food and shelter. Notice that these are the sorts of things that I'm going to need in order for my rational autonomy to be meaningful and effective. Now, in the modern world, there's much more agreement on negative rights than there is on positive rights. And we'll have an opportunity to talk about why that is the case in an upcoming video and in the class forums. Rights sometimes conflict. How do we go about prioritizing them? For instance, many Americans believe in a right to life, and we also believe in a right to privacy, the right to make our own decisions about issues that are very important to us. The debate about abortion in America is a debate about which one of those two rights takes precedence. The other kind of question we want to ask is this: are there other beings besides humans that have rights? And if so, do they have the same rights that humans have? In a few weeks, we'll be talking about environmentalism, environmental ethics, and this is an issue that we'll discuss again. If Kant is right that rational autonomy is the foundation of rights, and we look at some of the higher animals, we'd have to admit that to various degrees, some animals actually have rational autonomy. Does it follow from that that some animals have rights? This is another question that we can reflect on as we're doing the reading this week.